Hi everyone. Welcome to our talk today. Just to get started, I would like to introduce everybody that sits on the panel here, starting with Fernando, sitting next to me here. His name is Fernando Laposse. He's a London-based Mexican artist and designer who trained at Central St. Martin's as a product designer, specializing in transforming humble natural materials into refined design pieces, working extensively with overlooked plant fibers such as sisal, loofah, and corn leaves. He often works with indigenous communities in his native Mexico to create local employment opportunities and raise awareness about the challenges they face in a globalized world. His projects are informative and educational, addressing topics such as the environmental crisis, loss of biodiversity, community dissolution, migration, and the negative impacts of global trade in local agriculture and food culture. His work documents the issues and announces possible resolutions through the transformative power of design. Then we have Axelle de Buffévent. She's culture and creative director for Maison Perrier-Jouët. Axelle, in her role of culture and creative director, is instrumental for Maison Perrier-Jouët. She initially joined in 2011 when the style director role was created especially for her to forego a strong visual consistency for Maison Perrier-Jouët in the world. She recently extended her role to prestige brands with Pernod Ricard headquarters and brings extensive experience instigating and guiding creative collaborations with world-class designers and artists. She specifically manages the relationship with the growing list of artists who collaborate with the house. Her role as a patron of the arts grows through such conceptual installations which are not bound only to champagne. A clear passion for beauty runs throughout her work. This, combined with a natural curiosity and dedication to excellence, results in projects of artistic integrity that push boundaries. I don't know how many of you have seen the installation, but after this, I hope you'll all take a walk down the aisle. Denise Costich, at the end over there, Senior Research Associate in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Cornell University. Denise is a passionate student and defender of maize diversity and the cultures that nurture it, past, present, and future. She is currently a Senior Research Associate in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Cornell University, returning there after her dream assignment as the director of the maize collection of the Global Seed Bank at the International Center for Maize and Wheat Improvement in Mexico. Always on the lookout for opportunities to promote the use of maize diversity and to empower maize-growing communities, she reached out to Fernando Laposse and became an instant fan of the Tonahuixla project and the community in the state of Puebla, Mexico. Thank you for joining us here. I hope I read it to make sure we highlighted everyone's achievements. And before we actually start our conversation, we're going to see two short videos. One is the collaboration between Fernando and Axelle's group, and the next illustrates the work that Fernando has done with Denise, and by extension, with the gallery. I'm Jennifer Olshin. I'm from Friedman Benda Gallery, and we have the honor and privilege of working with Fernando, and by extension, everybody on this panel here today. So we'll just turn to the videos quickly.
What is the mission of an artist, if not to bring a message to the world through creativity? For me, it's about being optimistic and deeply committed.
For this collaboration with Maison Perrier-Jouët, pollen appeared to me as a perfect symbol to link the elements of nature together. A celebration of life and the meticulous care given to their vineyards, right at the heart of the Champagne region of France. Pollination is a complex and vital process essential for biodiversity. It is a fleeting moment, contrasting the patience of nature and the time needed for the aging process of champagne. Using only the precious elements that nature can offer me here in Mexico, organza silk, sand, and natural dyes with real flowers, I created the Pollination Dance, a holistic universe that explores and celebrates nature's subtle interactions. The beauty and ingenuity of nature, these are the driving forces behind my own humble attempts to re-enchant our world. I think most people don't realize that there's much more varieties than the yellow corn that we have in supermarkets. You have varieties that are red, that are black, these deep purples, these pinks, and all of these colors translate into the leaves. What my project tries to do is to really visualize the diversity of corn that we have in my home country of Mexico. But the project really goes way beyond that. The variety of native corns in Mexico has been severely depleted. That's due to many factors, but it's mainly caused by global trade that favors industrial hybrid corns over traditional seeds. This means that farmers still using traditional methods are unable to make a living. But if they switch to agriculture using chemicals, it can have devastating effects on their land. As a result, people are leaving their towns to look for jobs somewhere else. The Toxomostle project is a collaboration between myself, a designer, a seed bank, and a community called Tonawixla, who are struggling to preserve their way of life.
In traditional agriculture, the seeds belonged to the family. They kept the seed at the end of every harvest. They selected the ones that they liked, and they were able to grow it the next season. And basically, it was a freely accessible resource. With the creation of hybrids, maize became a business. The way that hybrid production works is that you grow that seed for only one cycle, and then the next cycle you buy more seed. And this is a completely different model over the traditional way of growing.
Yo recuerdo que se cultivaba y había mucha tierra fértil, pero desde el momento que vino la industria de fuera, o sea, ya vino a cambiar todo. Todos los químicos que se le aplica a la planta vino a erosionar también la tierra. Ya veo que en vez de árboles o tierra para cultivar, hay piedras. Aquí están creciendo las piedras en vez de árboles. Pero ya nos dimos cuenta que ese químico nos está afectando y por eso decidimos cambiar.
I saw an opportunity in using the brilliant colors of the husks of native corn to make a new material. So totomostle is it's a veneering material that can be used for making marquetry, for making interior furniture and wall panels like the one behind me. The process is quite simple. It just involves ironing the leaves flat, gluing them onto a backing. It can be laser cut or it can be stamp cut to make all the individual pieces to make a surface. I thought I could help the situation of Tonawixla with totomostle because it would give farmers an incentive to plant native corn again. Thanks to the project, the community of Tonawixla is now sourcing native seeds from CIMMYT, a research center that has the world's largest collection of corn seed.
The work that we really love is with the communities, where we have taken our historical collections, so these are collections of maize from 50 years ago, and we are returning them to the community's origin.
I started to have this idea of setting up a workshop to employ local women to do the transformation from the husks into the final material.
La mujer se dedica a estar en la casa, a cuidar los niños. No tiene un papel relevante, digamos, porque nunca aportamos algo económico. Para mí es un orgullo pertenecer al grupo que está conformado por madres jóvenes. Contamos con un ingreso más elevado a lo que viene trabajando un hombre. No sé la palabra, pero es muy increíble ver lo que nosotros estamos haciendo, unas piezas que van a parar hasta un castillo o a casas modernas, no sé, es muy, muy bonito.
So people might be wondering, why should I care about what happens to this tiny town and their native corn? And the answer is, everyone should care about this. If there's a point where chemical insecticides can't deal with a particular plague, or if there's a big change in climate, we might lose all of our food. And so diversity of plants really means security, because if one plant fails, we have a backup.
Con el maíz se hacen las tortillas, se hace el atole, se hace maravillas con con el maíz. Entonces sin él, pues no sé qué iríamos a comer porque no tengo la menor idea de qué haríamos sin el maíz el día de mañana.
So, I'd like to start with Axelle, as a matter of fact. A few days ago, we spoke, and you explained that you had an affinity to Fernando's work and his explorations because it had a consistency with the values of the House of Perrier-Jouët and the types of projects and the initiatives that you were looking to collaborate with. So I wondered if you could say a bit about that, about the commonality of the underpinning of the values that you share.
Well, I think we've been commissioning artists for over 12 years now. But it really started in 1902 when we commissioned the beautiful bottle designed by Émile Gallet, who was one of the major proponents of the Art Nouveau movement, and which makes our bottles so recognizable today. And what this is, I mean, Art Nouveau is really where our DNA lies, more in the ethos of Art Nouveau than its physicality. I mean, obviously, the physicality belongs to the past, but I think the ethos of Art Nouveau is pretty much relevant today. Fernando's work really echoes that ethos. It's inspired by nature, as you could see, and not only nature, but nature and its processes. It's designed to add beauty to everyday life and beauty for the ones who receive it, but for the ones who make it too. I think it's very important in the process. When you're talking about biodiversity, I think we are part of the biodiversity, so it's important that every single part adds beauty to the process. It's about blurring the boundaries between disciplines, and I think Fernando has shown that there are no boundaries. I mean, it can start in the soil, and I think it's really about celebrating altogether the beauties of life. So it's out of those four pillars that are the real philosophy behind Art Nouveau. I think Fernando really ticks all the boxes. And it's the way we've been choosing the designers we work with for 12 years. So we really still infuse that philosophy through the vision of designers. And their vision as well as takes us to the next step. I think when Fernando visited us the first time, he went from the cellar, obviously, and conversation with our cellar master, but he went to the vineyard first, and I think this is where most of the inspiration comes from.
So, Fernando, can you talk a little bit about the experience working together and how you drew out those values into a visual presentation that could be communicated?
Yes, I guess what was really interesting was to go to France and visit the fields. You know, obviously the most publicized part of Perrier-Jouët is always the Maison Perrier-Jouët with all the heritage Art Nouveau, but to be perfectly honest with you, I was more inspired by going to the fields because Perrier-Jouët is doing something really interesting, which is to sort of slowly start stepping away from the idea of a monoculture, which is something that is very deep to my research in general. And it's really nice to see, you know, such a big player in the whole culture of Champagne starting to bet on a future where you're adopting more of a permaculture system where you have more biodiversity amongst the vines. So what they've been doing for years now is to so along with the vines, wild flowers, wild plants, plants that will attract certain insects. They're dealing with the insects that they don't want in very innovative ways, in very French ways as well. I remember the head agronomist talking to me about sexually confusing them uh, with special pheromones. So like certain insects wouldn't mate there, and inviting the other insects that were the good kind of insects. So it's a really it's a completely different way of looking agriculture at that scale, but it's a truth, or it's an idea that rings true in traditional agriculture in many other places of the world. So I started to see a lot of connections to all the work that I've been doing in Mexico, where, with indigenous agriculture, you start to really look at all these interconnections of everything. So that was part of the inspiration. The other inspiration, of course, was to eventually, yes, go and see the beautiful house, all that heritage of Art Nouveau. I mean, I think even the hinges in the doors are made by Guimard, so it's like, it's an insane place. And then to go down to the cellars and to look at probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of bottles over a 10-kilometer network of caves under the house is just insane. Not only because of the sheer amount of liquid, but it's almost like looking at each bottle as a time capsule. Really, when you're drinking champagne, you're drinking nothing more than good grape product, but also time. You're effectively drinking time. So those were sort of the main inspirations into starting to think about this collaboration, and what you can see over there in the booth that we created is a space where you get to see this, that sort of beautiful moment of pollination, which is essential for agriculture, essential for our life, and trying to really represent this idea of permaculture and biodiversity.
Thank you. So now I'd like to move on a little bit to discussing even a little bit further some of the biological reintroductions, or the saving of wisdom, or the saving of seeds that led to the saving of wisdom, and kind of what it means to not only reintroduce biodiversity into the places you've worked in Mexico, but what does that mean for the community, and how does it start to infiltrate the community around, the society, the patterns, and also both the past and the future legacies. So let's see, I don't know who wants to speak first, but how did you guys meet? Was it I think that Denise, you're a fan of Fernando, or did Fernando reach out to you?
Oh yeah, I can start with how
Go
I started
ahead.
my project, and then when Denise came in, and then maybe you can
Yes.
you can tell how that developed
Because
eventually.
just to say that these worlds don't always mix.
No, definitely not.
So it's really a unique and amazing thing, because there's incredible things that happen between fields and interdisciplinaries that by just looking in tunnel vision we'll never find. So people like this are the ones that cross over.
Yeah, I mean, the video that you saw is already quite old, as you can tell by my appearance, but also the video started talking to a point where we're already quite advanced in the whole process. Initially, it started with a food design residency that I did in Mexico, and this was in an art center that was started by an artist called Francisco Toledo, who, besides being one of Mexico's top painters, he was also a really fierce activist. And one of his sort of very important actions was to mount a defensive for our national corns. And when I was doing this residency, it was a really kind of pivotal time in the history of Mexico, because the Supreme Court was going to vote on whether or not to install a permanent ban on GMOs in the country. So there was a lot of activism. It was very sort of engaging, and it was hard not to also be contagious by this kind of fever of trying to defend our heritage corns. So I came up with the idea of the veneer, but I very quickly realized how hard it was to find these colored leaves. I mean, this was in Oaxaca, which is supposed to be, one of the most sort of traditional places of Mexico. And it was basically impossible to find any leaves, even in the central markets. So I got a few, I made one prototype. I eventually applied for a design competition using that idea and that prototype to try and get funds to kickstart the project. And it was sort of like a Facebook public voting competition. And somehow the video became totally viral. By the way, farmers love Facebook in Mexico, so it became this sort of viral farmer video, which caught like wildfire, to the point where the organizers thought they were hacked because there were so many votes for me to get that award. But that's how I think Denise ended up hearing about me, and she reached out, being like, "Hey, how can we help? Do you need any help?" And I was like, "I need a lot of help," because I had been trying to, reintroduce some of the seeds, but I was just getting seeds from other places that had colors. I had no idea. So this is where Denise comes in, and she can talk more about that.
Yeah, so Fernando and I have a mutual friend who has a website for his foundation. So it's a foundation about saving the Mexican tortilla. Industrial-made tortillas are horrible. They are just the worst thing on earth. But those that are made with homegrown maize are infinitely better. They're a complete other thing. So Rafael, who has his foundation, he posted the contest. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to vote for this maize guy because he's doing this great project with heirloom maize and also working with communities. So of course, I voted for him along with many other people. And then I thought, well, hey, why don't I reach out to him and see if our collection that we have, we're at an international agricultural research center in Mexico. We have a seed bank, and it's the largest seed bank for maize in the world. So we cover a lot of diversity, and also we have the benefit of being located in the center of origin and diversity of maize. So going back to the late 1940s, early 1950s, there were collections that were starting to be made because people already at that time were thinking, hey, we're going to bring in all this great hybrid maize. We don't need that stuff, but maybe we should save it. Maybe there's something about it that we should not let go. So they started making all these collections. In the 1960s, that's when this institute opened. And the institute and the National School of Agriculture in Mexico decided to take that collection that they had been accumulating and split it. So half of the seed from each collection stayed with the national collection, the other half came to the international collection. So the two collections kind of diverged. The national collection stuck to Mexican, but the international collection started collecting all over the world because maize is grown all over the world, and it in fact covers the largest land area of any crop in the world. So we not only had the national collection from Mexico, but we also started accumulating, not me, because I wasn't there yet, but started accumulating from other countries. So anyway, I figured, hey, this guy's working with maize diversity. Maybe we have something that we can help him with. The other thing that we do, and this is a kind of project that I completely love, is to do something we call rematriation. So remember, these collections were made back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and now that communities are starting to let go of growing their own maize, there is a loss of that seed. And so in many cases, we've been able to work with communities to bring back that maize that's sitting in our refrigerator and bring it back to the communities. And that's what we ended up doing in Tonahuixtla. Fernando brought his his team, and we, gave them the VIP tour of the vault. That's what you saw when in that video where we're walking around. There's all these shelves. That is the vault of the collection, and we had a number of collections from the same region of Tonawixla, and we, this is what we do. We give away seed for free because our collection is what's called a global good. So anybody in the world basically could request seed from us. You can go to our website and order it, but usually people need a little help to figure out what exactly do I want to grow. So we had a great meeting with Fernando and his group, and they started growing it, and then a very interesting thing happened. So I will let Fernando explain what happened when they started growing the old maize mixed in with what they still had left in the community, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what, just to pick up on a few things that you said, for me, this is also obviously a social project. And so as a designer, it's all about also looking at why are people stopping to plant these seeds? And for me, it's two main things. One of it is there's a market that has been created globally to disfavor this type of agriculture. So it's become, unfortunately, almost more expensive to practice this kind of agriculture if you're just thinking of bulk, weight. So it's all about, okay, what can I do as a designer to generate more revenue for them, more interest in them, more incentives for them to not stop planting this. And one side of it is economical, but I think there's also the other side, which is about our indigenous communities are constantly being put down and told that their way of living is archaical, sort of backwards. It goes against progress, and actually a lot of sort of government programs, the first thing they do is we're going to help you progress. You have to be planting in the American Midwest if you really want to make money out of this. So going to a place like Denise's institution, it's a major confidence booster for them, because all of a sudden they realize that what they have is valuable, that what they have is worth keeping and is worth preserving. And that's what we started to do. And I think this idea that design can be this sort of glue that can glue someone like a scientist, a community of indigenous farmers, the international design community that is looking at this, I think is one of these massive strengths of design. And the collaboration has been great. I mean, it started with just at the beginning, just making seed stock, just reintroducing the seeds that they gave us. But through this incentive to create the material, the farmers slowly over the years started to become more and more and more engaged to, I think, the moment where we reached this climax, which is, unfortunately, we couldn't fit it in the presentation, but we have this beautiful cabinet that I made for this solo show in the gallery in September, which has a completely new hue of color, because that is the result of a hybrid that the farmers did by cross-pollinating two of the varieties that one was the last variety that they have locally that they didn't lose, combining it with a red variety that we got from Denise. And this idea of cross-pollination, which is a hand pollination, is something that we learned through the agronomist at CIMIT, at the seed bank. And that yielded a new colorway of veneer that we've never worked with before. So I see this furniture really as the first total equal collaboration of the farmers bringing their skills and their knowledge and their incredible knowledge of this plant with me as the designer. But there's a big part as well with Denise, and we'd like to focus a little bit on that, because I think it's also touching on what we're trying to discuss with Perrier-Jouët, no? This idea of the importance of pollen as the birth of a plant.
So I think that there's several aspects to this that are important to design, obviously. I mean, when we think about design, we think about problem solving, check. We think about relationship to humanity and relationship to the broadest group of people, communication, check. We also think a lot about just a very more basic instincts of joy and beauty, and it's an optimistic medium in many ways. That doesn't mean everybody's beauty looks the same, by the way, but it's a touch point to think about what is beautiful and to think about your place in the world, and these projects are so poignant in that way. It's pure in a way that these values come through. So I was thinking about it is because this project also has a way of touching individuals. So sometimes it's like a mass-produced product, and sometimes it's a handmade personal product. But somehow, in this case, you kind of hit both the individuals and the larger groups. So we were speaking about one woman, for example, that. Well, you can tell her story a bit, but who's engaged in this project, and she comes from the original farming community that you worked with, and now has become a designer. And maybe you can tell a few words about her. We tried to have her picture here, but she's here in spirit. But
well, yeah, I think part of the amazing thing about this community is sort of the social aspect of it. Is a really tight-knit community, and I think Denise and her team got a really good taste for that, and it's people that really want to learn. So we did somewhat of an exchange program where the farmers that we work with went to get training in some of the summer schools that the seed bank has. And I think, if I want to concentrate on that one family, it's really interesting because Nicolas, the head sort of manager of the studio, because by the way, we created a studio in the village where all the materials get processed and some of the products get completely done there. So Nicolas is the sort of manager of the studio and the organizing of the farmers, him being a farmer himself. But a nice progression of that is now his daughter went to Mexico City and started to work in our studio in Mexico City, and she started just by helping as helping hands, but slowly but surely she's been progressing in the studio to the point where now she's getting involved also with things like laser cutting, things like composition, so she's slowly starting to become a designer. And this idea that indigenous people are still people of the 21st century, that deserve to be included in the modern world is fantastic, because that's, I guess, what we're trying to do as a whole, as a design studio, perhaps as a community seed bank as well, is to say, okay, how can we create a situation where we can have some progress in some areas without sacrificing tradition, no? Which is something that you guys clearly do. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
That's I think the basis of what you're doing, Axelle. Sort of the continuity and the iteration and the focus on the present, because it is a story about the future as well, which is so exciting, because with all the news that we hear about the climate and about the world and about materials and raw materials, and it's a really innovative and exciting way forward. And another thing that I sort of at one point in the video, you said, why should people care about a small town in Mexico? And I think that while this particular typology and methodology is not necessarily scalable in other areas that aren't growing corn or whatever, that it is an approach, it is a way of looking into the the essence of your community. What are your materials? Where is your history? What knowledge do you want to save for the future, and how do you want to evolve? And I see a couple of designers out here. One in particular, I won't embarrass her, but from Ukraine, who has done a similar kind of deep dive into a community that she's from to bring back traditions or heritages while being fully cognizant of the world we're living in today, to create this way forward. And so, anyway.
Well, I think something that I've seen, in both projects, and I definitely see it in Tonahuixla, and I see it with the collaboration with Perrier-Jouët, is even looking at the word agriculture. Agriculture is culture. So that's also what, places that have strong agriculture are places that have strong culture, and France definitely has it. And I think it's all about that. It's this idea of the savoir-faire that goes all the way from the fields to the champagne making process, is something that is universal in both countries, in Mexico and in France.
I think what you're describing is the fact that we all learn from the past to bring it to the future, but we all learn from each other too. So, the farmers were learning from you, you learned from them, and you probably, as a designer, are a kind of catalyst of all this.
Yeah, definitely.
So, does anybody have any questions? No questions? We have one.
Yeah, sure.
Do you find use for the corn, the kernels, as well?
The grain?
Yeah.
Yeah, they eat it.
Great.
I mean, that's a very obvious question, but that's a very obvious answer. But it's a really good question, because I think there's been a bit of a renaissance in Mexico, looking back at our indigenous corn. Definitely more and more present, especially in the high gastronomy area. High cuisine. But I am a little bit skeptical about that, because, I almost have the feeling that now you have more opportunities to eat heirloom native corn in places like Polanco or La Roma in Mexico City in the upscale restaurants than in some indigenous towns, because it's become such a commodity now that most of these communities just sell their good grain and then they end up eating rubbish, So a big part of my work is to say, no, we're going to create a financial situation for you where you get most of your revenue from, doing this, from design and the design of these pieces and the manufacture of this material. And you get to keep the grain, You should be feeding your families with that grain. And so, if you look at it, there's a lot of design projects that are dealing with waste and agricultural waste. And I always found it really frustrating when they were categorizing my project as a project of using waste. Because I'm like, no, there is no waste. It's more about regeneration, regenerative agriculture, biodiversity. But if you really want to look at it as waste, well, maybe you could say that the byproduct is the grain. So how many projects can say that the byproduct is food,
One of the other projects where we worked with a group of farmers in the state of Morelos, which is the state right directly south of Mexico City. So it's part of the breadbasket that feeds all those people that live in Mexico City. And we had a collection that was made in the state of Morelos in 1966. And we returned, and luckily we had the names of all the farmers and the villages they came from in our database. And we had a student who was able to go back and find the descendants of those farmers and study which families still have the same maize and which families have lost their maize and why. And then, so there was a socioeconomic part of the project, but then there was also a genetic study to understand, are we losing genetic diversity? That's a huge, huge issue that people are saying. We're losing the diversity of our most important crop plants. And I remember in one of the first sessions where we had interviews with the farmers, we were asking them, well, what are you growing? And I was very surprised to hear that most of them said, well, yeah, we grow our own maize, but we also grow this hybrid maize. And I was like, oh, well, why are you growing both of them? And they said, okay, the hybrid maize, that's for the animals. The land-raised maize, that is for us. That is what we eat. So this, you could grow side by side or near these two types of maize, but they have different uses. And that was a big lesson for me that, hybrid maize does have a role, but the true taste and of that maize comes from the maize that comes from that place. So, yeah, it fits right in with what we're talking about today.
I first want to say that I'm so excited by this project and your collaboration. It really just touches deep chords in me. And I am wondering, I think it's so extraordinary what you've accomplished. And I'm wondering how you can leverage your experience in what you've been able to create in terms of forging a regenerative future, social, economic, spiritual, environmental. How can you leverage what you've done to inspire more people around the world to engage in projects like this one?
Is that a question for me or for Axelle? Do you want to take it on?
I think for us, being a champagne house, inspired by artists for over 200 years, it's a role we have to take, ensure we give a voice to people that are inspiring and that can build a positive future for all of us. So I think it is a role we have to take on, and I think we're very happy we did it with Fernando, and every year we have to meet with another amazing designer, and it's going to be a challenge this year.
I think you also cast a pretty broad net. You're not hierarchical. You're not globally centric. You find who you find. So I think in that way the projects really differ from one to the next, and you see the diversity there.
It's about their voice, and I think they are paving the way, and we follow. As a brand, we follow.
I guess it is about inspiring people, and perhaps, again, this is where design has such a power, because you can read the news, you can read all these stats about, the climate crisis or, the problems of the world, or even possible solutions to them. But I feel like our job as designers and creatives is to perhaps sometimes simplify things, so that they're easily to understand, but also bring complexity to other things. I'm always really skeptical of a really neat solution for things. So part of my job is sometimes to, in a very aesthetic and inviting way, also talk about things that are not that easy, and let's take the time to sit down and think about these and think about, that our actions are taking us into a certain direction, and there's always time to correct the course, But I think for me that is good design, when you create empathy in people and curiosity in people to go and learn something.
Hi, good evening. A question for Fernando. First of all, I want to congratulate you because the installation in Perrier-Jouët is amazing. I have a lot of respect for you, Fernando, as an artist, as a designer, as an activist, as a person. I know that I think that you take a lot of research, in your projects, because I know that for the avocado project that you launched in Guggenheim, it took like 4 years of research. So my question is, are you researching right now for any other new project that you want to come out in public in the near future?
Well, I mean, the avocado project really consumed my whole life for 4 years, and so did Perrier, honestly. They're both very ambitious projects. So, I mean, that was the avocado project. By the way, it's like something I just launched last week in Australia, and it's really looking at the other sort of factor, which is also really looking at how the environmental crisis is also really linked to a crisis of inequality, And so when we really look at Latin America, for me, the biggest challenge is how do you close that gap? Because without really balancing, these social inequalities, it's going to be really hard to preserve these ecosystems. So that is research that is always ongoing, It's really about reading about these very global conversations, but then how to land them with particular communities. So the avocado project is kind of taking me away from the deserts where I harvest corn into looking more at the forests. And yeah, we're looking at future projects with these communities as well that talk more about the reality in the forest as well. But linked to similar topics like the corn, it's how, we're consuming so much in certain areas of the world, and that takes a lot of resources from other areas of the world. I mean, I sort of closed my presentation about avocados with the last slide that I think is relevant to this one as well, which is, I remember when I was a kid and I was learning about the Aztecs, and there was a story about how the Spaniards were completely blown away by the lavish lifestyle of Moctezuma, the last Aztec emperor, and how they would bring him fresh fish from the Gulf of Mexico every day. Every day there was like a line of sprinters that would sprint with a fish, all the way from the Gulf. So he would have free fish, and it was the same, from the south, from the jungles with fresh fruits. And I was thinking, well, if you think of the average person in the developed world today, that person probably has a more lavish diet than even Moctezuma did back in the day, So, we can't all live like emperors and expect the planet to sustain us. So I think part of what I tried to do as well is, and this might be, with the corn project or even what we're trying to say with Perrier-Jouët, I mean, as far of a stretch as that might seem, but, I think this is why I really appreciate these spaces to be able to talk about these things. We really have to think about these interconnections. We can't be consuming with such, lack of measure, because it's just totally unsustainable.
Thank you.